Greetings, John here again with a look at Gears of War 4 for Xbox One in beta form. Now before we jump into action, it should be noted that this is still very early code here, but between the press outings and the wide availability of the beta, it seems like as good a time as any to check in with its current state of performance. After all, Gears of War 4 is an exciting proposition. To start with, it's the first original game created by the Coalition, Microsoft's super team dedicated to the Gears franchise. The remake of Gears 1 was already fascinating, but we're more interested in seeing how the team fares when creating something original. What has really piqued our interest, however, is the technology driving the game, Unreal Engine 4. After all, Unreal Engine 3 powered a huge number of games last generation, including the entire Gears of War franchise. In fact, the first Gears title, released just 1 year after the launch of Xbox 360, basically helped build Unreal Engine 3 into the juggernaut it would become. Unreal Engine 4 though? Well, we really haven't seen a whole lot on the engine on consoles just yet. There are a handful of indie titles using it alongside Street Fighter V and Epic's upcoming Paragon, but we really haven't seen it used in a big AAA shooter just yet, at least until Gears 4. The beta we're taking a look at here though doesn't seem to be demonstrating the full might of the engine just yet. While the single player campaign is targeting 30 frames per second and looks pretty amazing, the Coalition has decided to go for 60 frames per second in multiplayer. This of course means trading some visual fidelity for a huge boost in frame rate. It's a split we've seen become increasingly common this generation, with single-player campaigns of games focused on the cinematic experience, while multiplayer, which is very competitive, is designed around faster controller response and smooth performance. As expected then, the trade-offs are pretty evident here when comparing to what we've seen of the campaign. We do at least see the expected jump to physically based materials and higher resolution textures, of course, something that was also true of the Ultimate Edition. But the actual lighting in the maps is somewhat flat, and levels appear overly angular in design. Animation also feels somewhat unrefined in its current form. But at least the game feels responsive to play, even if I'm terrible at it. There are still some noticeable upgrades here over the previous game though. Screen space reflections are used in abundance and are of great quality. Shadows are smooth and clean, particles and explosions look suitably thick, and temporal aliasing is kept to a minimum. There is definitely still room to improve, but all of these elements stand a good chance of being tweaked for the final game, so we wouldn't pass judgment just yet. Still, the graphical cutbacks would all be worth it if the frame rate is rock solid. After all, Halo 5 made plenty of smart cutbacks and managed to deliver a near flawless 60 frames per second experience in the process. So to start with, Gears of War 4 actually uses an adaptive VSync solution similar to many other Xbox One titles. This means you'll see tear lines along the top portion of the screen, provided the buffer flips early enough, otherwise the frame is simply skipped. It prevents tearing from becoming overly noticeable and keeps input response somewhat crisper than a full triple buffer setup. But how does the beta stack up then? Well, across the run of play, we're basically looking at a general level of performance of around 55 frames per second on average, with mild screen tearing of course. In addition, we observed plenty of skips and stutters that interrupted fluidity at various points, something actually mentioned within the body of text shown when you first launched the game. In beta form then, Gears of War 4 just isn't that smooth yet. But don't look so down guys, as this isn't necessarily bad news. Gears of War 4 doesn't launch until this coming October, and the Coalition still has plenty of time to smooth things out. You may want to bookmark this video right now for later just to see how the final game stacks up. I bet it'll be smoother. After all, our early analysis of Halo 5 showcases plenty of drops under 60 frames per second, but in its final form, we all know that the performance was almost a completely locked 60 FPS. We saw the same thing with the first multiplayer hands-on with Uncharted 4 last fall as well. Since then, things have improved tremendously. With Gears 4 coming reasonably close to hitting its target frame rate, still 6 months out from release, it's unlikely that this will be a problem. Which is what we're expecting in the final game. It's very likely that, come October, we'll be enjoying a solid 60 FPS experience in Gears 4 multiplayer. Really, what the Coalition has undertaken here is pretty impressive in the end. The visual quality isn't quite where we'd like, but it's still an Unreal Engine 4 shooter running at 1080p 60 frames per second on the Xbox One. How many other games can claim that? Still, Gears of War on Xbox 360 always represented the most cutting-edge visuals in console gaming at the time. Go back to Gears 3 and it still looks pretty amazing. While Gears 4 does have a lot of potential, it's clear that the priorities have shifted. We're happy to see 60 FPS in the mix as it does improve gameplay, but there are some users used to 30 FPS that may have preferred a stable 30 frames per second experience instead. You can't please everyone though, but it's interesting to see so many Xbox One first-party titles aiming for a higher frame rate. Anyways, that's about all the time we have now, but we'll be back in the future with more on Gears 4, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and until next time, this is John, signing off.